In every one of these biblical episodes, God persisted and the people of God resisted because they did not know how to discern whether it was really God making the call. Flip through the pages of the Bible, page after page, chapter after chapter, book after book. The Bible is filled with stories of people finding themselves unsure how to be sufficiently discerning regarding the vocation to preach, to prophesy, to proclaim that the word of the Lord is in the world. And in the midst of all these biblical passages, Esther, the book of Esther, may be the most peculiar one of all. The whole book of Esther is a fun and fascinating story about people who hear voices and make choices in the hope that they are discerning the truth. And the key is that secret that I shared with you from the lesson that April read earlier this morning. When a man named Mordecai says to a woman named Esther, "Who knows? Perhaps you have come for just such a time as this." Who knows? Is that the best the Bible can do? We don't need more questions. We need answers. We're in the process of deciding what to do with the rest of our lives. We are in the midst of dealing with the decisions that could change the course of our destiny. We are considering the possibility that this is the time, this is the hour when we can discern what is the will of God for us. And if we cannot have a definitive and dramatic encounter like Paul's on the road to Damascus, wouldn't it at least be nice if the Bible could offer us a little more help than who knows? The book of Esther is a pretty flimsy place upon which to build the foundation of a life-changing discernment. Maybe that's just one of the reasons why that Old Testament book called Esther has been so rarely read and so infrequently and reluctantly relied upon by Christians. Just yesterday in my office on the SMU campus at Perkins, I decided to pull the full 4 volumes of John Wesley's sermons off my shelves and check and see how many times did John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, preach in his 50 years of ministry on a text from Esther. What I found was that in 50 years of preaching, according to the 4 volumes of his published sermons, once, in an indirect way, he referred to Esther. Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant Reformation, not only didn't preach from Esther, he despised the book. He said, and I quote, "There is too much that is heathen in it." And then he added, "I wish it did not exist." Esther is only one of 2 books in the whole Bible out of the 66 that is named for a woman. But many feminist interpreters of the Bible think that the book of Esther is a terrible text because of the way the central figure, Esther, submits herself to a subordinate role in sexual surrender to a dominant male. The book of Esther is never quoted in the New Testament. It is rarely read in the Christian church. And worst of all, it never mentions God. Not once in the entire book of Esther will you find the letters in the English translation G-O-D. So why did I get saddled with the text this morning? Most Christians never read the book. Those who do are perplexed by it. Janet Larson says it's a fairy tale like Cinderella. And this one's even better. Timothy Beale says, and I quote, "It is exotic, savage, violent, dangerous." Well, that ought to make it interesting to you. The book of Esther is exotic, savage, violent, and dangerous. It is a story of ostentatious wealth that is outrageously spent on self-indulgent luxuries. It is filled with episodes of sex and violence. There was so much sensuous stuff in it that George Frederick Handel wrote an oratorio about it. Frankly, I'm waiting for the day when somebody builds a video game about it. I can almost imagine one level of play in which competitors get to determine who will be impaled on a stake that is 75 feet high. That's in chapter 5. You could look it up. Or I can imagine in the video game another level of play in which players compete to decide how many combatants they can kill in the time allotted. By comparison, there were 75,000 killed in chapter 9 in one battle. Well, let's relax a little bit. Let's see what the book of Esther really has to offer. We, after all, need discernment. And the book of Esther is filled with some surprises. Some of it is just plain fun. Not all of it can be taken seriously. And for one thing, above all, to read the book of Esther, one has to have a sense of humor. It begins with a banquet. I mean, a banquet. A question for you. What is the longest amount of time you've ever spent at a meal? What's the longest amount of time you've ever sat at a dinner table with your family? 30 minutes? Hour? Okay, Thanksgiving is coming, an hour and 15 minutes. I know we live in a fast food society and meals together around the family table may be rather rare occurrences, but what is the longest amount of time you've ever been at a dinner? Some years ago, my wife and I were in Montreal where I was attending an academic meeting. We had an open evening on the schedule, and somebody suggested that we should walk down the street and enjoy a leisurely dinner at a French restaurant in Montreal. We did. We sat down at the table with a friend and had a feast, and realized after a wonderful evening of food and conversation, the meal had lasted for 3 hours. It was amazing. But it was nothing compared to the time when some members of a church where I was a pastor introduced my wife and me to relatives of theirs, an Italian couple from New Jersey. And the husband in the family said, "You must come to our house and eat, mangia." They told us to arrive at 2 in the afternoon. We did. We began to eat. Course after course emerged from the kitchen, and a pasta, soup, salad, lasagna. Then came the entree. Dessert, fruit, nuts. When I checked the time, we'd been feasting for 7 hours. Now that was a dinner. As I said, the book of Esther began with a feast. It didn't last 3 hours like mine in Montreal. It didn't last 7 hours like mine in New Jersey. It lasted 6 months. And as soon as it ended, it was followed by another banquet, which lasted for another week. By the end of the 7th day of the second feast, according to the first chapter of the book of Esther, the king was merry with wine. You think? At this point, after 2 banquets lasting 6 months and then 1 week, and merry with wine, the king called for his wife, Queen Vashti. Now, I imagine that she said something like this: "There is no way I am coming to you in your condition." What the text actually says in verse 12 is that she refused to come. But you get the picture. And in response to her refusal to obey a direct order from the king, he had her put under house arrest and he divorced her.